Arkham Horror, the card game, is a cooperative living card game in which 1 to 4 investigators work to unravel arcane mysteries while overcoming the dangers of the mythos and the personal demons that haunt their past. Each player assumes the role of a single investigator as they investigate a series of connected scenarios that create a narrative campaign. During each scenario, the investigators explore menacing locations, look for clues that enable them to advance the story, and attempt to defeat the treacherous forces arrayed against them. As the players make progress in the campaign, each investigator will gain experience and insight, which allows them to develop in a variety of ways. But beware, as one's exposure to the arcane world increases, so too does the risk of insanity. Steel your nerves and arm yourself. All manner of strange and eerie investigations await you in Arkham Horror, the card game. In the following example, the players choose to play The Gathering, the first scenario in the Night of the Zealot campaign. While playing a campaign, the investigators advance from one scenario to the next in sequential order. The decisions made during each scenario may carry over to influence future scenarios during the campaign. Using the campaign guide, the players follow the campaign setup steps, beginning by choosing their investigators. In this example, one player chooses to play as Roland Banks, while the other player chooses to play as Wendy Adams. Each player then assembles their investigator deck, consisting of their investigator allies, equipment, talents, skills, and weaknesses. During this example, each investigator will use the starter decks outlined in the Learn to Play guide. The players then choose a difficulty level, which determines the Chaos tokens that will be used throughout the campaign. Chaos tokens will influence all investigator skill tests for the duration of the campaign. Each scenario card in Arkham Horror the card game belongs to an encounter set and can be identified by its icon. Using the campaign guide, players gather each encounter set for the Gathering scenario. This collection of cards creates the encounter deck, the act deck, and the agenda deck. The Gathering Acts cards and agenda cards are placed side by side, along with the matching location cards and the Gathering Scenario reference card. The Act deck represents the investigator's progress and advances from one Act card to the next as the investigators gather clues and work towards their goal. The Agenda deck represents the objectives and progress of the malicious forces pitted against the investigators. Doom tokens may advance the agenda deck through the course of a scenario, revealing the unfolding story and presenting dire choices. In this example, the campaign guide also instructs the players to set aside the Ghoul Priest and the Lita Chandler cards and shuffle the remaining encounter cards to create the encounter deck. The study location is then put into the play area. The other locations are set aside, and each investigator begins to play in the study. When an investigator enters a location, it is revealed and a number of clues equal to that location's clue value are placed upon it. In this example, the study's clue value is 2 per player. Each investigator then draws a starting hand of 5 cards and gathers 5 resource tokens from the token bank. The investigators are now ready to begin the scenario by reading the text on the agenda and act cards, paying close attention to the details. Each round of Arkham Horror the card game consists of 4 phases: the Mythos phase, the Investigation phase, the Enemy phase, and the Upkeep phase. During the first round of the game, players skip the Mythos phase and advance directly to the Investigation phase. During the Investigation phase, each investigator takes a turn as they attempt to gather clues and survive the challenges they might face. Once each investigator has taken a turn, the Investigation phase ends. Wendy was chosen to be the lead investigator and decides to take her turn first. During a turn, each investigator may perform 3 actions. With her first action, Wendy plays a stray cat, an asset card, with a resource cost of 1. When played, asset cards are placed in the investigator's play area and remain in play throughout the game. With her second action, Wendy investigates the study, hoping to find a way out. Each investigator possesses 4 skills: willpower, intellect, combat, and agility. In order to investigate a location, an investigator must make an intellect test against that location's shroud value. The shroud value of the study is 2. Wendy has an intellect value of 3, which is higher than the shroud value. However, during all skill tests, the investigator must reveal a chaos token from the chaos bag. These tokens modify or influence the results of skill tests. Wendy reveals a -1 token from the chaos bag, giving her a modified intellect value of 2, which equals the study's shroud value. She succeeds at investigating the study and discovers 1 clue. When an investigator discovers a clue from a location, they move it to their investigator card. When the investigators gather a number of clues shown on the current act card, they may spend them to advance the act deck. For her third action, Wendy decides to investigate the study once more. Wendy's intellect value is still 3. This time, however, she reveals a -2 token from the chaos bag, giving her a modified intellect value of 1. Wendy has failed the skill test. Thinking fast, Wendy decides to play 1 resource and play the lucky event card from her hand. Event cards represent tactical action, maneuvers, spells, tricks, and other instantaneous effects at an investigator's disposal. Playing an event card usually counts as one of an investigator's 3 actions, but lucky has the fast keyword, which means it does not cost an action to play. Lucky reads, play when you would fail a skill test. Get +2 to your skill value for that test. Wendy therefore adds 2 intellect for this test, for a total of 3. Wendy has surpassed the study's shroud value and discovers another clue. Wendy now has no actions remaining, so she flips her investigator mini-card over to indicate that her turn is over. It is now Roland's turn. For his first action, Roland also decides to investigate the study. Roland decides to commit a skill card from his hand in order to boost his chances of succeeding. Whenever an investigator performs a skill test, before revealing a chaos token, that investigator may commit 1 or more cards from their hand that bear an icon matching the test they are performing. For each matching icon committed to the test, the investigator gets a +1 bonus to their skill value. Roland commits the deduction skill card from his hand, which has 1 intellect icon, giving him a +1 bonus for this test. His intellect value is increased from 3 to 4. Roland then pulls a chaos token from the chaos bag, revealing a -1 chaos token, bringing his intellect total down to 3, a success. Skill cards often have additional effects that are active when the card is committed to a skill test. In this case, deduction reads, if this skill test is successful while investigating a location, discover 1 additional clue at that location. Roland therefore discovers 2 clues from the study. The investigators now possess a total of 4 clues. In order to advance the story, the act card, Trapped, requires that each investigator spend 2 clues. Roland and Wendy choose to immediately spend their clue tokens to advance the act deck. This allows them to escape the study, which reveals new story elements and new locations to explore. Advancing the act deck does not cost the investigators an action. The back of the act card informs the investigators to place the hallway, cellar, attic, and parlor location cards into play. It also instructs them to discard any enemies that were in the study, place the investigators in the hallway, and remove the study from the game. Because the investigators are in the hallway, this location is revealed. The hallway has a clue value of 0, so no clue tokens are placed on the location. Since there are no clues to discover in the hallway, Roland uses his second action to move. When an investigator moves, they may move in any location connected to their current location. The connections between locations are indicated by the icons at the bottom of each card. If two locations share matching icons, they are connected. In this case, the hallway is connected to the attic, cellar, and parlor. Roland decides to move to the attic. Because Roland is moving to the attic location for the first time, it is revealed, and 4 clue tokens, 2 clues per investigator, are placed on it. The attic also has text that reads, "Forced. After you enter the attic, take 1 horror." Roland places 1 horror token onto his investigator card. During the game, investigators may be dealt damage and/or horror. Damage depletes an investigator's health, while horror depletes an investigator's sanity. If an investigator ever has damage or horror equal to or above the printed value on their investigator card, they are defeated. With his final action, Roland decides to draw a card from his investigator deck. Roland draws a .45 automatic, a weapon he may find useful in the rounds to come. With no actions remaining, Roland flips his investigator minicard over to indicate that his turn is complete. Now that each investigator has completed their turn, the investigation phase ends and the game proceeds to the enemy phase. During the enemy phase, all enemies that are in play will pursue and attack the investigators. Since there are no enemies in play at this time, the game proceeds to the upkeep phase. During the upkeep phase, the investigators find their bearings and prepare for the next round. To begin, each investigator turns their investigator minicard face up and readies any exhausted cards. Each investigator then draws 1 card from their deck and gains 1 resource from the token bank. Roland draws an evidence event card. Wendy unfortunately draws her stubborn detective weakness card. Weakness cards have detrimental effects when they are drawn. Stubborn Detective is an enemy who spawns engaged with Wendy when it is drawn and reads, "While Stubborn Detective is at your location, treat your investigator as if his or her printed textbook were blank except for traits." While engaged with Wendy, the Stubborn Detective will hinder Wendy's ability to perform actions and will attack her during the next enemy phase. Finally, each player checks his or her hand size and discards down to 8 cards if necessary. The game round is now over and a new game round begins. Round 2 begins with the Mythos phase. First, 1 Doom token is placed on the current agenda. If the amount of Doom in play equals or exceeds the value of the agenda, it will advance, revealing some new information and bringing the forces of darkness closer to victory. Next, each investigator draws the top card of the encounter deck. The encounter deck represents the perils, monsters, madnesses, and other obstacles that the investigators may have to deal with throughout their story. Roland draws a ravenous ghoul enemy. When an enemy card is drawn, that enemy spawns engaged with the investigator who drew it, unless stated otherwise. The ravenous ghoul reads, "Prey, lowest remaining health." Since Roland has the lowest remaining health at that location, the ravenous ghoul is placed in front of Roland's investigator card. Wendy draws a Grasping Hands Treachery card. Treachery cards have one-time abilities that resolve immediately when the card is drawn. Grasping Hands reads, "Revelation, test agility 3. For each point you fail by, take 1 damage." Wendy must perform an agility test in order to avoid taking damage. She decides to commit a card from her hand with an agility icon in order to gain +1 agility for this test. Because Elusive is not a skill card, its text has no effect while committed to this skill test. Wendy draws from the Chaos bag, revealing a -4 Chaos token. Wendy fails the test by 2 points and takes 2 damage. Whenever an investigator takes damage or horror, that investigator may choose to assign it to the assets they control. Wendy assigns 1 damage to her stray cat and 1 damage to herself. Because the stray cat has only 1 health, it is destroyed and placed in Wendy's discard pile. Now that both investigators have resolved their respective encounters, the mythos phase ends, and the game proceeds to a new investigation phase. Wendy, as the lead investigator, decides to take her turn first, but is currently engaged with the stubborn detective enemy. For her first action, Wendy decides to evade the stubborn detective. In order to evade an enemy, an investigator must succeed at an agility test against that enemy's evade value. Wendy's agility value is 4, while the stubborn detective has an evade value of 2. Wendy reveals a chaos token with a special symbol on it, which indicates a scenario-based effect. When this type of token is drawn, the investigators refer to the scenario reference card in order to determine the token's effect. The effect for this symbol reads, -1. If you fail, take 1 horror. Wendy succeeds at the evasion attempt and does not take any horror. The stubborn detective is exhausted and the engagement is broken. The stubborn detective is moved away from Wendy's play area and placed next to her current location, the hallway. Now that Wendy is no longer engaged with the stubborn detective, she is free to perform whichever action she chooses without being attacked. For her second action, Wendy decides to move to the attic. The attic reads, Forced. After you enter the attic, take 1 horror. Wendy places 1 horror token on her investigator card. For her final action, Wendy decides to gain 1 resource. She then flips her investigator mini-card over to show that she has completed all of her actions for this turn. It is now Roland's turn. With his first action, Roland decides to fight the ravenous ghoul. When attacking an enemy, an investigator must succeed at a combat test against that enemy's fight value. Roland's combat value is 4, while the ravenous ghoul has a fight value of 3. Roland draws a chaos token from the chaos bag, revealing an automatic failure symbol. For his second action, Roland decides to play his 45 automatic, paying 4 resources from his resource pool. Because Roland is already engaged with the ravenous ghoul and is performing an action other than fight, evade, parley, or resign, the enemy interrupts Roland's action and performs an attack of opportunity against him. When an enemy attacks an investigator, there are no tests that need to be performed. Enemies simply deal damage and horror to that investigator in the amounts listed on the enemy card. In this case, 1 damage and 1 horror. With the attack of opportunity completed, Roland places his 45 automatic into play next to his investigator card. Whenever an asset with the uses keyword enters play, a number of resource tokens equal to its uses value are placed on it. The 45 automatic reads, Uses, 4 ammo. 1 of these tokens will be spent each time the card's ability is used. With his final action, Roland uses the action ability on the 45 automatic, which reads, Action, spend 1 ammo. Fight. You get +1 combat for this attack. This attack deals +1 damage. Roland spends 1 ammo from his 45 automatic and performs an attack against the ravenous ghoul. Roland's combat value is 5, 4 from his ability and +1 from the 45 automatic. Roland then reveals a +1 chaos token, bringing his combat value up to 6. The attack is successful, and 2 damage is dealt to the ravenous ghoul, 1 from Roland's attack and 1 from the 45 automatic's bonus. However, the ravenous ghoul has a health value of 3, so it is still alive. Roland then flips his investigator mini-card over to show that he has completed all of his actions for this turn. The game now progresses to the enemy phase. The stubborn detective is currently exhausted, so it does nothing during the phase. The ravenous ghoul is currently ready and engaged with Roland, so it performs an attack against him, dealing 1 damage and 1 horror. The ravenous ghoul is then exhausted. With no more enemies that need to activate, gameplay continues to the upkeep phase. During the upkeep phase, each investigator's mini-card is turned face up, and all exhausted cards are readied to prepare for the coming round. Each investigator then draws one card, gains one resource, and checks their hand size. Play then proceeds to the mythos phase of the next round. The investigators are currently on the second act of their story, but the agenda will soon advance. At the end of this scenario, regardless of their outcome, Roland and Wendy will advance to the next scenario in the Night of the Zealot campaign. Their successes, failures, and story decisions are recorded in their campaign log, which may provide them with rewards or consequences in future scenarios. As investigators delve deeper into the mythos, they gain insight into the hidden truths of the world, which manifests in the form of experience points. Between scenarios, an investigator may spend experience to purchase new cards for their investigator deck. This allows an investigator to experience the game in new ways, not simply participating in the game, but actively shaping how it is played. However, an investigator's exposure to monsters and arcane forces may also lead to dire consequences. As investigators advance through scenarios, their risk of insanity and injury increases, taking the form of additional weaknesses or trauma. If an investigator suffers physical trauma equal to their health or mental trauma equal to their sanity, that investigator is killed or driven insane and cannot be used for the remainder of the campaign. Arkham Horror, the card game's campaigns, are not only responsive to your successes and failures, they are responsive to the degrees by which you succeed or fail at various tasks. Failure in one scenario may continue to haunt you into the next. In Arkham Horror, the card game, deck building starts with your choice of investigator. Each investigator has their own parameters for which cards can be included in their deck, including a specific deck size, class options, and card level requirements for those classes. Each investigator also comes with a number of unique investigator-specific cards which must also be included. Each of the game's investigators belongs to one of 5 classes, and each class is associated with a series of player cards that grant it a distinct flavor and identity. Every player card costs experience equal to its level, which is indicated by the number of pips in the top left-hand corner of the card. When creating a new investigator deck, investigators can only access level 0 cards, and they must include the exact number of cards indicated on the back of the investigator card. Players may not include more than 2 copies of any given player card, and each standard player card in a player's investigation deck must be chosen from the deck-building options listed on the back of the investigator card. Finally, each investigator must include their unique weakness card and a random weakness card. These cards represent character flaws, curses, madnesses, injuries, or other elements that are part of an investigator's backstory, or that are required over the course of a campaign. Deck building in Arkham Horror, the card game, is an experience that deepens throughout the course of your campaign. As you experience the horrors of your adventures, your investigator's deck will grow and change to reflect your journey. Something evil stirs in Arkham, and only you can stop it. Blur the traditional lines between role-playing and card game experience, and pursue layered mysteries within a world of Lovecraftian horror. No matter what compels you, no matter what haunts you, you'll find both your strengths and weaknesses as you and your fellow investigators unravel the world's most terrifying mysteries in Arkham Horror, the card game.